stuff I just covered there.
Yeah, that's okay. We can go ahead from here.
Okay. So I guess I'll kind of back up a step here, and I'll start off with who I am. So for those who maybe didn't see my introduction before with ClearGuide, I'm Brian Carey. I'm the Director of Traffic Operations, and I work at our Regional Transportation Management Center for MnDOT. And getting into the IPEMS program. So IPEMS, we deployed, gosh, it's been probably almost 10 years ago or so now. And this is kind of the precursor to the ClearGuide program. Was really developed to ingest more of the traffic sensor data, as opposed to where ClearGuide is intended more for that probe data, for the HERE data and such. So we, like I said, have had this for quite some time. There haven't been a whole lot of modifications to it. It seems like Iteris is putting more of their money into the ClearGuide product and kind of making that one more robust and probably more user-friendly and having more data tools and such. But IPEMS, I think, is still a very worthwhile tool to kind of dig into. I'll admit that it's a little bit clunkier, especially compared to ClearGuide. And so it is a little bit harder to get maybe some of the reporting tools. But once you kind of get comfortable with it and familiar with it, it is a pretty powerful tool in itself, and allowing you to be able to track large amounts of data in a very kind of short period of time. And I'll kind of give a demonstration here today. So I put the link in the chat box, so you can access it there. When you go to this website, this is what you'll see first. This is kind of the initial intro screen that shows just the real-time traffic conditions that are happening out there. So you can kind of get a sense of where our coverage area is for our detection. And then you'll have to apply for an account. And this is where everybody always misses this, but you'll notice this line right here that's underlined that says apply for an account. I've asked them for years, make this a big button so people actually see it, but everybody always misses that little hyperlink there. Click there, fill out the information, and then you'll be able to get access. And for internal folks, internal to MnDOT, your access gets approved right away, but anybody who's recognized as an external based on your email, I actually have to go in there and prove it. So knowing that I'm giving this presentation, I'll kind of watch for that in the next couple of days and approve you. But if for some reason, you sign up and you're not getting like the approval email back in your account, just let me know. So with that, I'll log in myself here, and we'll get rolling with what's actually in ClearGuide. So this is the main screen once you first log in, and there's a few different places you can go kind of from here. I usually like to start with kind of this real time, and I'll note too, just kind of like a caveat, I've probably got a half an hour here that I'll kind of present and show the IPEMS tool. And then we'll have a couple of kind of, real world case studies of folks who have used it. And then allow some time for questions and stuff like that. But certainly, if you can interject here as I'm kind of rambling on, you could probably even kind of throw out questions as time goes on. But the caveat I want to put out is, half an hour is probably not going to really do IPEMS justice. I'll just kind of show you at a high level of how to maybe get to some of the different tools, and then you can kind of go from there. So, so I go into this real-time map here. You can see on the left-hand side, this is kind of a good spot to start because it kind of, it shows you the coverage area of where everything's at, but then there's some cool tools within here that then allow you to kind of jump to different reporting options as well. And so like the map on kind of the initial splash screen where you can apply for your account, this is showing the real-time data that's happening right now. As I zoom in here, you'll see some other features kind of popping up here. Similar to ClearGuide, IPEMS is also bringing in our changeable message sign information. So if I click on one of these signs, you can see what the current status is of that sign. You can also see some incidents are popping up in here. These incidents are coming from our IRIS software. So this is kind of what our operators are currently monitoring. So there is an accident at this location on 35 North, on 35W northbound. And if I click on like one of these cells, like we can see there's some congestion here on eastbound 494, kind of approaching like France Avenue or in the area there between 100 and 35W. Sorry, having a little technical glitch. It's not letting me actually click on the line. Maybe if I zoom in a little bit more.
So Brian, is the source of this data the detectors in the pavement primarily?
Yes, that's correct. So yeah, I'm gonna, as I answer your question here, I'm going to transition to Zoom, or not to Zoom, we're in Zoom. I'm gonna transition to Google Chrome
Yeah.
and see if Chrome has a little bit better time than Edge. I've usually had more success with Chrome. I know Explorer, even back in the day when Explorer was still supported, still had its own issues too. So that I'll just see if that resolves the problem. But in answering your question, yes, this is all the MnDOT traffic sensors. This will be all the loop detectors or Wavetronic sensors that we have out there. And then that data, the sensors are typically every half mile and in every lane. And then that data is provided back to our traffic sensor rather, every 30 seconds. And the IPEMS is picking up on that data feed. So what comes out of our Iris software is then put out in a data feed to the public. And that is what IPEMS is capturing. So this data is coming in real time. So it's maybe up to 30 seconds old. And yeah, you can see how my icon changes to a little finger pointer thing there when I hover over a sign, but it should be doing the same thing when I hover over a road. So that's really kind of interesting. That's the only downfall of live demos, is that sometimes things happen. It's letting me do it here, so maybe I'll go with that. So so most of the data, like in these real-time reports, will show up right away. Some of the reports actually do get compiled overnight, and so you might not be able to get to like today's data, but actually have to look at yesterday's data and before. And the data set does go back to the mid 90s, and it really kind of depends on whether or not there was detection on that corridors. Because today we have 400, maybe 500 miles of freeway system covered with detection sensors. Well, it was probably 200 miles back in the 90s. So you might get corridors like in the downtown area that have data, but as you get further out, those are probably going to be more recent. But realistically, how many of us really go back and look that far back at data? So for the most part, you should have enough data that you would need for any kind of realistic before and after study.
And this iris that you're mentioning, can you say a little bit about what that is?
Yeah, sorry. Iris is our traffic control software that we use. And Iris is what controls all of our changeable message signs, controls the ramp meters, controls our easy pass lanes. And it's what also is ingesting all the detector data that's coming in from the field. So it's really our software application that's talking to our field devices. And then it has like a number of algorithms in it that calculate like ramp meter time or calculate the travel times that you see popping up on the sign. So that's what Iris is. That's our kind of
That's
in-house
for
software.
the whole metro area, the whole MnDOT system, or?
Yeah, it's really the whole metro system and all of statewide.
Okay, interesting. Thank you.
Yep. But a lot of that statewide. I mean, it might be signs up in the Brainerd area, but there's not necessarily like detection in that area and stuff like that. So yeah, somebody's trying to call me, so I'm decline that. So getting back to this thing here, so right now I'm showing like a link analysis. So it's taking those detector stations and kind of drawing those artificial links between them. If I hit the stations here on the left-hand side, it changes all those to individual dots. And those dots then show the actual location of the detector. So if I go back to like where that congestion was there on 494, I can click on like this red dot here and it'll show me what the current travel speeds are, but then also kind of an average as well as kind of a range of travel speeds. So you can see that blue line is showing what's currently happening. And then that grayish line in the background is kind of the typical over the last 30 days. And then there's a gray band that shows kind of that maximum and minimum value. So we can see that this type of congestion at this hour is not too unusual. It's kind of following along with that average speed data over the last 30 days here or so. So let's see if I can find like another example. I'll just pick, let's just go right over here. And now this one's here is showing, free flow speeds, but you'll kind of see the congestion pop up here. So here you can see, yeah, it's free flow now, and that would be pretty typical for this time of day. But then, around like 2, 3 o'clock, then we're going to start to see those speeds drop and then not return until after the rush hour around 6 or 6:30. So this is a nice kind of quick snapshot way of kind of seeing what's happening out there on the system, and what's live and what's maybe kind of anomalies and such. Going back to that link analysis, there is another tool here where if I hit, instead of live traffic, I can go to historical, and historical will show me just kind of a slider of what things look like in the last 24 hours. And this is where, ClearGuide really kind of blows IPEMs out of the water in that respect, and that, we can go back like years. This one only allows you to go back 24 hours. I can't pick like a particular day in the past, so I can just kind of cycle through it, and it doesn't really play you an animation, but rather if you keep hitting this little +5 indicator, it just kind of jumps up in time. So you can see it's like 1:30 yesterday, and then it goes to like 1:35. So like I said, it's a little bit clunkier than ClearGuide, and not nearly as modern as ClearGuide is, but it does the job. So getting back into some of the reporting tools, I'm going to go back into that station level. And I'll have to admit, it might have been actually my fault as operator error, because I haven't really used the real-time screen. I think that the ability to hit those charts that pop up there only shows up when you have it in the station mode, not in the link mode. I'm guessing that's probably what the problem was, is I didn't recall that piece of it. So usually I'll get into the reports in kind of a different way that I'll show you. So if I wanted to dig a little bit deeper, not just in terms of what's happening on this particular day today, but when I go back in time, I'll hit the aggregates button here. And that'll dive me down into some more detailed reports that I can then also customize. So it's going to first give me a time series report, and it defaults to flow. And so I can see kind of my criteria up on the top here. I've got, particular date range. It always kind of defaults here to the last week. So from October 20th to the 27th. I can tell it whether to include specific days. I can have it narrow in on a certain time window. So maybe I just want to look at peak periods. I'll just leave it as the all for right now. And then I can choose a multitude of different quantities here. I can choose the vehicle flow. I can choose occupancy, which is kind of that occupancy rate the detector is being influenced by a vehicle. So it doesn't have anything to do with the actual like occupancy or number of people in the car, but rather how long that sensor has been activated, which is kind of a function of traffic congestion. And then, raw speed, vehicle miles traveled, vehicle hours traveled. There's this Q factor that Caltrans uses a lot, where it's kind of a ratio of VMT to VHT, travel time index, and then you'll see a number of different delay calculations here. The reason for the difference is that the V there for speed, I can tell it like what I want it to determine as delay. So maybe I'll say, delay is only when speeds drop below 45 miles an hour, then I would pick this one. But if I wanted to say, no, I want delay to be anything below 55 miles an hour, then I can choose this one. And then it's the same thing kind of for lost productivity. Lost productivity is intended to be those times when you end up in a congested state, and now you're starting to have a decrease in throughput. This would be a good measure for like measuring ramp meter effectiveness to see, how much can we improve upon that lost productivity. So you might do like a before and after analysis after deploying ramp meters, and hopefully see some improvements there. So there again, I can select lost productivity based on the threshold of which speed I want to have as my preferred threshold for that. So getting back to just kind of reading the screen, the top here, you can see the heading says flow and vehicles per hour. 6,516 lane points. I mean, basically that number is maybe a little bit irrelevant. It's kind of showing you how many 30-second pieces of data are in there, and times how many lanes that you're reading from, and it it just gives you a really big number. The biggest number to really kind of think about is this percent observed. The higher this number, the better data quality that you have. And so what IPEMS will actually do is if it's missing data, it'll actually try to interpolate data. So it'll look at neighboring detectors, it'll look at historical data, and it'll try to give you some sort of value for that. And so by looking at this 82% observed, that means 82% is actual data that came from the sensor. The other 18% is data that was interpolated. And in this chart, you really can't see which is which. If I pull up some of the tables, and I'll show you here in a second, it'll maybe show you a little bit more as to maybe where those gaps in the data were. If you go into like a work zone where maybe our traffic sensors have been out, because of the work zone, you'll actually see this say 0% observed, but it'll show you a plot. But in a way, that plot doesn't really mean a whole lot because it's really a plot based on historical averages and isn't really reflective of what's going on in that work zone. So that's a very important number to kind of watch out for. I'd say certainly something in the 80% or better is probably, okay, depending on kind of what your uses are. If it starts getting below that, yeah, I'd probably start to kind of question it a little bit and make sure that you're really getting, true representation. Getting to the line graph then itself, we have the purple line that's up on top there is the overall flow across that entire station. And then you can see the smaller, shorter lines here, the blue, the red, and the green. Those are going to be the various lanes, and you can see that in the legend down below. Let me think here. So I think IPEMS, if I recall correctly, I think actually counts from the right to left, if I remember right. I'd have to verify that. But it's usually pretty obvious. I might look at a min-pass corridor. It's always easy to tell because you can see the variation in the min-pass lane. So I'll maybe kind of get back to that. You can change some of your scales by clicking on either this auto or the max min, especially in this case where you've got the overall flow and maybe you want to see a little bit better what's happening in those lane by lanes. So I can change my maximum to 2000 and then now I can see a little bit better of what's happening in the lane specific data. Lastly, on this page, the bottom here is a schematic of what the corridor looks like. And so the direction that we're currently looking at is always going to be on the bottom. And then the direction of travel is going to be from left to right. And so the station that we currently have selected is the one that's got the red arrows on it. So if I kind of hover over it, you'll see a name pop up. It says France Avenue Main Line. And if I kind of hover down here, yeah, well, this is Xerxes Avenue, which would be east of France. So, that's going to be that direction of travel. These are going to be your exit and entrances. So I can hover over those two and it shows me that it's an off ramp, shows that's an on ramp from France. Where this is important and it's kind of cool is that if you ever use some of our other detector tools, you got to know the detector number and you got to use like our all detector report and find out what the number is. And then if you want to jump to the next station, you got to type that all in again. Here, I can just jump ahead to Xerxes. So these are all actually clickable. And so now here's kind of the same reporting tool, but now at Xerxes Avenue. And then I could, jump ahead again and I should be at Penn. So now I'm at Penn Avenue. So it's a very quick way to kind of look at traffic volumes as you're kind of going downstream. And I could do the same thing by clicking on like an exit ramp. This would be the exit to Penn. And so now we'll just probably get one line graph because it's just the one exit ramp detector. Now I can see that, the Penn Avenue exit usually gets about 300 vehicles per hour kind of during those peak times. Another kind of caveat with this is that that Iris software that I was talking about earlier provides the kind of the lane schematic for IPEMS to ingest, and then it kind of takes that and interpolates it the way it sees fit. So you can see that it's, a 4-lane section, and then we drop a lane here at France, and then we go into a 3-lane section. Not too many changes on this corridor. This is then the westbound direction. You can see where we pick up the lane there at 35W, and then that carries through all the way to 100. The one caveat with that is that on this corridor, it worked pretty well because our lane add was on the right and our lane drop was on the right. So it accurately reflects that. But if you have a lane add or lane drop on the left, it actually shows it on the right because it doesn't really recognize where that lane drop is happening. It just recognizes that, oh, the corridor went from 4 lanes to 3. I'm just going to assume it happened on the right. So that's just one thing to note. So like if you looked at East 94 at 280 and you've got the left-hand exit to 280 with the lane drop, IPEMS is going to show it on the right, and it's also going to show all the exits on the right. So it's just not smart enough to know the difference there. I can then click on like the opposite direction here, because like I said, this is westbound on the upper portion of this black line. You'll notice something that kind of weird that happens. All of a sudden, westbound ends up being on the bottom. So the direction that you're always looking at is always going to be on the bottom, and it flips the other one on the top. So if you're looking at eastbound, it works out really nice, but any other time you have to kind of think of how this image is now actually upside down. And any north-south corridor is going to be laying left to right, not up and down. So just some weird nuances there and stuff. Jumping into some other things, so I'm kind of getting into a lot of details and just some of the reporting tools, and then I'll show some other reports and stuff. So
one question, Brian.
Yeah.
So this information on ramps, is that just metro area, or is that wherever there's PEMS?
Yeah, it's primarily just in the metro area, and
okay.
Really just where we have the mainline detection. You'll also see the exit and entrance ramp detection.
Okay, because I've worked with data in the greater Minnesota area, and I didn't see too much ramp information there.
No, yeah, there's really not. Yep. Yeah, really once you get outside of metro, and a lot of that's because of our ramp metering system really kind of depends on that data. And so there's, not as much once you get kind of outside that system. So here I hit the view table. The view table, you can see kind of that raw data then coming through as opposed to in the chart. Here's where you can maybe get a sense of like where the discrepancies were. If you remember that chart before said that was 82% observed. Well, here I'm getting a lot of 100%. If I scroll down, okay, here's some 75%. It was on the 22nd. Guessing what happened is that maybe one of the detectors was not reporting during that time or something like that. So here's where you can kind of dig a little deeper and see, where was the actual problem. But for most of the week, everything was recording pretty well. Other features here, you can export text. You can export it as a text file. You can export it as an Excel file, and you can also export it as a PDF. So that way you can kind of, play around with it in other formats if you'd like. So some other charts based on the same detector location. I can do like a time of day report. That one here, I'm going to go back to the plot, not the table. So in this case, this is the data table showing kind of a typical for time of day. You can see the minimum is the red, the mean is the green, and the blue is the max. This is showing for all days, but if I wanted to just eliminate the holidays and weekends, I could do the same plot, and now to be more representative of kind of a weekday traffic. So you can see the lines kind of tightened up a little bit there. I can also do means and standard deviations, and I can set my own percentiles if I want. So those are just by clicking off and these different ones. So I could say, give me the 10th percentile, 10 percentile, and 75 percentile. Just arbitrarily picking numbers here, and now you can see, it refresh the graph doesn't look a whole lot different, but maybe if I wanted to weed out some snow days or weed out an incident day or something like that. And then there's an option also doing discrete days. So then it actually does a line for you for each day that within the range that you've selected. So you can see the multiple lines, one for each day of the week that over the last week since the October 20th. I'm going to jump ahead here a little bit. So one of the things to note is that if you click on Iteris, the little logo up here in the upper left, that always brings you back to the home screen. And so you can kind of start from there and going to those different pages like I was showing. Another way to get to some of those reports is by going up to these performance targets up here. This is where it gets a little bit confusing. If I wanted to pull some reports based on the entire freeway system, I would go into facilities and devices. I click on freeways here. And now it gives me this long, long list of all the corridors that are in the IPEM system. And so you can see it's mostly focused on like a lot of the interstates and then a lot of the major routes and stuff. So I don't have like down to local level or anything like that, just controlled access roads. I'm going to take 394 eastbound here. If I click on that one, now it's going to give me all the individual detector data information. I got the location name. It shows me if it's an on-ramp or exit or mainline sensor. And then we actually don't have in this program, you can flag the detectors for HOV. We've never actually set it up that way. So even though this corridor does have a HOT lane, it's not reflected as that in the IPEM software, but the data will still come through. So if I picked one of these, like if I picked Ridgedale Drive here, it will jump me to basically the same charts that we were just seeing, a specific detector station and that detector station only. Now I'm going to go back to this previous one. So now, I'm back to this list of all my detector points. What if I wanted to run like a performance chart based on the entire corridor? So this is where you would do that. You would go up to performance here. We'll go into aggregates. I'll just do a time series here. And here it's going to, since it's a corridor and not just a point location, it's going to give me a vehicle miles traveled as opposed to an actual volume. And so now I can see the VMT on this corridor over the last week from when my data point was selected here. So it's still going back to October 20th. And you can see the variability there from morning peak to afternoon peak, and then also kind of the lower peaks on the weekends and so forth. And then if I do like a secondary quantity here of delay, I'll plot that on there as well. Now I can kind of see what the delays were on this corridor over the past week. And so, starting on the 20th, you can see a little bit of delay in the morning and then a lot more delay in the afternoon, and kind of correlates with those higher traffic volumes. Certainly what we're kind of seeing typically across the metro is really seeing those PM peaks kind of returning, but the AM peaks are still pretty light. And this is probably where IPEMS really is a powerful tool, is that I can go back and I can start in January of 2020. So go back to kind of pre-COVID, and I'll look at, VMT and delay, but I think I'm going to want to go to more of a daily, just because, we're talking a lot of data here and the plot would take forever and look really messy. So it takes a little bit of time here, but you'll see it's relatively short because we're pulling, almost 2 years worth of data for a 11, 12 mile corridor or so. So it's a lot of sensors, a lot of data points coming in here. Hoping this one doesn't take too long. Usually it maybe takes, 20, 30 seconds, which sometimes feels like an eternity when you're trying to fill airtime, but there it is. So, if you were trying to pull that data out of like our data extract tool, populate it into Excel, you'd probably have to do multiple data pulls, because data extract, if you're familiar with that program, usually doesn't let you do this much data at one time. And Excel has its own complications with large data sets. So here, we're able to see this change in VMT over the last almost 2 years. And so you can see that kind of pre-COVID levels, and there's the, seesawing back and forth because of weekends and weekdays. But for the most part, you can kind of get a sense of like where the weekdays are up in this 450,000 vehicle miles traveled. And then it, plummeted back in March. And then through some of the closure times there that we had and the stay-at-home orders, as those were starting to be lifted, then we saw volumes kind of increase and kind of came back up over the summer. And then as COVID cases started to increase again over last winter, we kind of saw in November, travel volumes kind of dropping again, and then they kind of came back in the spring, and then have kind of risen back up again. And you see they're still not quite back up to where they used to be. Still a little bit below. Some of the other analysis that we've done has found that we're still probably down about 5% on the freeway system, a little more during the peaks actually. And this one's interesting because it's actually showing in the last month that things kind of dropped even more. So, some of that's probably actually because the kind of 35W projects being completed, and then we removed that added capacity lane on 394, so that, oh, this is the wrong direction for that, but just showing the maybe a little bit of a drop in VMT there because of construction being done on the 35W corridor and maybe folks returning to that route. But able to see that that change due to COVID just on one specific corridor, and then we can see the congestion levels too. And the green is that delay again, and how that kind of seesawed back and forth, and then pretty much became non-existent during that shutdown time period. But then we'd have some little slight blips of delay, but still nothing like in the past. And you can see these monster spikes that shoot up. This one in November, I kind of remember that one that was actually on Veterans Day when we had actually our first snowfall of the year last year. So that's a snow day. Good chance that a lot of these other spikes that you see kind of shooting up here are snow days as well. So great way to really kind of pull a large data set all at once. I'm going to go back. I'll kind of show that again here with a different corridor, just because I know that's a little bit confusing as to how to get there. So you get from your home screen, you go into the facilities, you hit that freeway tab. Now it brings up your particular freeway. I'm going to bring up, let's try something different. Let's try West 36. So here's West 36. You can see it's starting there with Cleveland Avenue. And then it goes all the way to the far end of it where it gets into Stillwater. I'm going to say I'm not interested in the whole corridor. I'm only interested to 35E. So basically between 35W and 35E. So you can see 35E at the bottom at this point right here, and then there's these mile point listings, about 5.2. I'll round up. If I want to truncate this and say just give me data up to that point, you'll see if I go up into this chart up above, there's a post mile range. I'm going to change that 20 to 5.2, and I'm going to refresh that by hitting view table. And so the table refresh starts at Cleveland, stops at 35E, and you see it truncated right there. So there's nothing after it. So now when I go in and I run this performance report and I go into like aggregates and time series, it's going to give me the same type of report like we saw for 394, except it's, now I'm looking at 36 and I'm only looking at a portion of 36. I'm not looking at all of 36 because I was only interested in that one section. So that's kind of a way you can customize it a little bit. Like I said, it's not as cool as ClearGuide, how you just kind of set up your routes like you would in Google Maps, but that's how you can kind of narrow in on a certain area. And so there I just added the delay on this corridor, westbound, more of an AM type route. So really not seeing much of a delay, except for a couple of blips here that are, most likely incident related or something like that. So if I go back then to the home screen and I go into that same facilities and devices and I hit freeways, but this time I stop here. Excuse me, I gotta get some water. Instead of clicking on one of these specific routes and going into that route report, I'm going to leave everything activated. And I go into performance and I go into aggregates just like I did before, and I hit my time series. Now it's going to actually show me a VMT across the entire instrumented network. So this is going to show you, anywhere that we have traffic data. So primarily in the metro, most of this is going to be metro. It's going to include a little bit of some outlying corridors, but not much. But here again, to kind of show the power of being able to pull large data sets here all at once. I'm going to go back to that January 1 date so we can get into that pre-COVID time. I'll leave it at VMT. I guess I'll throw in the delay too. And then I'm going to do it as daily. And this will be kind of another one that'll take some time to plug and chug. Oh, that one actually went quicker, which is funny because that's a lot more data than just one corridor. But same story, you're seeing the drop because of COVID and you're seeing it come back up, and then a little bit of drop over last winter. Not as much of that drop, or a little bit more stable here in the more recent months. So not having that construction impact like 394 was, but otherwise it's kind of telling a similar story as to what we saw in 394. But pretty powerful in that you're being able to see that much data in that short a time. So the Met Council has been kind of helping us with some of this data tracking related to COVID. They've got a website that they developed where they're looking at volumes on a particular day and looking at kind of like 3 years before, and then comparing that to what we would predict should have happened in a normal year, but then what happened with COVID. And then that's how we're getting kind of some of our percent drops that we've been kind of quoting of saying like a 5% drop. We haven't been using that so much here with IPEMs just because even though this is some, really cool data to show in a very short time frame, the concern would be is that, how clean is the data? As you can see here, it's only 77% observed. So there's a lot of kind of interpolated data here, and especially like in work zones. That's probably where most of that's going to be, like on 35W south of downtown that's been under construction for the last 4 years. It doesn't have any data there, so it's going to kind of interpolate that and fill in those gaps, and then that's going to kind of get thrown into this larger measure here. John, you had a question?
Yeah, so you kind of touched on it already, but one of the problems that we always had with the RTMC databases was that the historical changes of the detection system were not recorded well.
Yeah.
I have a very thorough collection of all detector reports dating back to the 90s, because when I want to go back, I want to go to the all detection report that's going to have the ID of the detector and the location of the detector that actually was at that point. PEMS is using the available real-time online geometry of the system that IRIS is maintaining. And that is what's happening today. When you have detectors that have been rearranged, moved, signs that have been changed, and all of a sudden those historical data are either unreachable or, at worst case scenario, they're wrong.
Yep.
So I was wondering, especially with this kind of view, there are new detectors that are coming online. How is that taking into account in not showing an artificial increase in VMT only because you have more data points, but in reality, that corridor wasn't instrumented before, or that part wasn't instrumented, so you didn't measure VMT there, so it's not in the sum.
Right. Yeah, and that's a really good point, and another kind of cautionary statement probably to looking at data over such a long period of time like this. I mean, I could see how well this works. This is at a month granularity over the last 20 years, and you'll see, a pretty good slope of increased VMT over that 20 years. And a lot of it is, like, as John said, it's not necessarily because VMT has gone up that much. Really, a lot of analysis has kind of shown VMT has been more plateaued, but it's because of the fact that our system is continuing to grow. So yeah, there is a huge risk of kind of looking at a large data set like that over a long period of time across that entire metro. There you go. There it finally came up. So yeah, back in 2001 on the far left of the screen to 2021 on the right side of the screen, showing a pretty good steady climb, maybe kind of plateauing a little bit in 2010. And I know because I work at the RTMC, we did a lot of growth from 2001 to 2010. And then we haven't really done as much in the last decade as we did in the previous decade. So that's why we're seeing a little bit more of a plateauing, is because our rate of growth of the system didn't increase as much. So,
and you notice, sorry to interrupt, you notice that the delay doesn't change that way. Would you think that if you actually change by 25% your VMT without changing, roads, the delay should have changed by 25% too. Because, so anyway, I mean, I don't know. I don't think, maybe I'm wrong, but they don't agree with each other, the trends.
I think some of that might be is that the delay, the corridors that were added were corridors that didn't necessarily have a lot of delay to begin with, because they were getting more into those outlying areas that
610, 212.
Yep, exactly. 52 down to Rochester,
No, that's what I mean. If it wasn't additional new roads, but it was VMT because more vehicles were on the existing roads, the delay would have increased. But since the VMT is increased because you instrumented more roads, the delay didn't, because those new roads don't have the delay. So you're counting more vehicles, but you're counting in new places, not more vehicles in the same place.
Yeah. But I think it's filtering out delay only if speeds drop below 45. So if any of these new corridors never have speeds dropping below 45, they wouldn't be included in that summation for the green line.
Yeah. Okay.
So I think that's why the green line kind of stays steady, is because we've had good coverage of those corridors that have been frequently congested for the last 20 years. But yeah, as we extend out, the corridors have less going on. So
quite the drop in corridors under 45 miles per hour after COVID, though. Like,
yeah,
this graph really shows that.
Yeah, it definitely does. It definitely does. Yep. But yeah, I mean, those are, kind of some of the unfortunate nuances with this program, or with just our data, really. I mean, it's not really a fault of the program. It's just, things to be aware of, and that our system's grown and the detection has kind of maybe changed over the years. So, like I said before, we have data going back to 95, who's going to go back that far anyway, but you probably don't want to, because there's going to be some other factors at play that you'd want to be careful of. So I should try to just jump ahead a little bit. This was an area that I went into facilities and then corridors and then listing. On some of our major corridors, when we first set up IPEMs, we had the ability that we could run some animations on them and such. So you could go in and hit Broadway Avenue here to 35B at 994 and run some different animations. This was kind of an area that we never really expanded, because ClearGuide kind of took this over and has some more detailed information, but or just easier user tools and stuff like that. But this would be like looking at that stretch of 94, and it plays an animation between the two downtowns. Kind of, there it goes. I don't know how well this is coming through the Teams feed, but you can see the congestion changing over time. So that's a couple of other features that are kind of buried in there as well. But I should probably let our other folks speak here. I don't know, Joe, are you wanting to go first and give a couple of examples of how you've used it on Highway 77?
Brian, just FYI, in the past, this meeting we used to do sometimes 1 to 3 p.m. And this is so interesting that even if you go over, I don't think any of us will mind.
Okay.
So
okay.
we don't have to stop at 2 o'clock. There's no, if there are more things that you want to show in here, I'm up for it. And if folks have conflicts later, they can watch the recording. And so it's great that I'm recording this. I'm learning things here that I've never seen before. So yeah,
Sure.
Feel free if you have more things to cover, more important things, take your time. Yeah.
I have a question before we move on. Can you talk a little bit about the incident information that's pops up here and there?
Yeah, I can show a few examples of that. I mean, like I showed it on the real-time chart. There is incident information in there. The incident information is more for reference of recognizing, okay, this particular day had a lot of congestion. There was an incident on that particular day. I wouldn't necessarily trust it for a lot of incident analysis, because it's not data that's really been kind of thoroughly cleansed and reviewed. It's not data that's coming from like the official crash reports. It's coming from the State Patrol CAD system, that when they dispatch a trooper to something, they use that CAD system to dispatch that trooper. That CAD system pushes information to our IRIS software. From IRIS, it then is maybe used by our operators to deploy message signs, and then it's fed into the IPEM system from there, because Iteris is just getting the data for IPEMs coming out of the IRIS software. So it's a useful tool in knowing that there's a possibility that something happened out there, but it's probably not something that you'd want to, necessarily do a lot of like incident review on, because I don't think it's going to be necessarily all inclusive. But I'll show you like a couple of examples of maybe where it could come into play, like getting back into that listing of freeway corridors. I think it might have even shown a couple. Waiting for it to load here. Tough one to show just because I have to know of a known incident, but usually what'll happen is like when I play this animation, a little diamond will pop up and it'll show like a crash occurred, and then you can start to see the congestion building up behind that crash. And so that's where it can kind of come in handy. There are some other performance charts in addition to this animation. It's been a while since I've looked at these charts. Oh, it should, hopefully it stops. Let me stop the, it's funny because as soon as I hit the go button, I saw that an incident popped up. So here you go. Here's an example of like an incident showing up on the screen. It'll show that there was a start time that had occurred at 16:27, and then it was cleared out in 49.2 minutes. Actually kind of laugh a little bit that it goes down to the 10th of a minute, because it's not not nearly that accurate to go down to the 10th of a minute. So this would have been the time that the operator then cleared it out of Iris, and then it would be cleared out of IPEMS. But that's probably got some variability there, maybe plus or minus 5 minutes or so. But at least gives you a sense that something occurred there. So if you're watching the animation and suddenly see some congestion building up from that point, you know that an incident is at that location. Oh, we had a few. Another one popped up over there, another one at 280, or Huron rather. So a few examples there of how crashes can kind of be shown on at least on this animation report.
So one question, Brian, for the incident. This is sure. I was just wondering, is that real time, or is like you showed the data yesterday? Just wondering, there was an incident on last Monday on 94. Just inside our work zone. I just want to see how soon we can get some analysis using the incident data.
The incident data is coming in real time. And then it's stored historically. So you could go back onto a previous day and then be able to plot that and see how, how much congestion was caused by that incident. I will say, since you're talking about work zones, this is not bringing in any temporary sensor data from work zones. So the only data it's going to be bringing in is the permanent sensor data. So within the work zone, you're probably not going to have a whole lot of information. Or the information you have is going to be interpolated data based on kind of more historical averages. So that would be one caution for work zones.
Sure, but the duration is really helpful to see how long the queue and clear. Yeah, thank you.
Mm-hmm. There are some tools that you go back to this homepage that do allow you to get into some of the incident data, and you can run. I'll do like another time series type of thing. Here's like the number of incidents over the last week, really longer than that, last month. I'm just gonna kind of draw it over the whole year. I mean, the only interesting thing there is that, you're gonna see these spikes here in the winter months when there's a large number of crashes and incidents and such. A lot of these event types don't really exist in our system. A lot of these are kind of carryovers because this was all built for Caltrans. And so we don't really have like a weather or police or or even the breakdown and congestion one. It's probably going to just primarily be accidents and breakdowns, I guess, for these two. Because I think if I pulled these out, I don't think we'll even see a noticeable difference, if anything, in the data in the plot. Yeah, I didn't really look at it that closely, but not a huge change. We might have hazard in there because that'd be like debris calls and stuff like that. But for the most part, some of these other ones don't exist. Oh, and then you can plot that to like BMT and BHT if you wanted to as well. But so those are some of the incident plots that you can do. There's some other ones where you can look at time of week, and that gives you this kind of funky radial thing that's kind of neat to look at. But you can see the heavier concentration. So look at it like a clock, you know, midnight at the top, and then 6 o'clock, noon, 9 o'clock. And then the different days of the week are the different kind of radials on the circle there. So you can definitely see the higher concentration in kind of the AM peak and the PM peak for the number of crashes. So the red dot gets bigger, you know, with the larger number of incidents. So during the time period selected here, just this whole year calendar date, if I hover over the circle on Tuesdays during the 4 o'clock hour, there's been an average of 15.81 incidents. But since a lot of this data, you know, it's more for illustrative purposes on the incident data. Like I said, it's probably not one that can be totally be trusted. It's more kind of for reference. Even I don't really use a lot of these incident reports much because they're probably not giving you like a true representation of everything going on out there. You'd want to, you know, dig into more of the traditional safety tools. This wasn't really intended to be that type of tool.
Can you talk a little bit about the detector health? Is there a visual way to see which ones are working currently, which ones are down, or any time series on the health itself, when we'll be able to get the data? Because sometimes if you're trying to get data from 2 lanes and one of the lanes is down, is there ways to see what's going on with that?
So let's see, in PEMS, I know there's some detector health charts in here. It's been a long time since I've looked at that.
Yeah, I mean, sometimes when we zoom in on a location and try to get data, I see in greater Minnesota that I don't get any data for some days or some months for some locations. So, I mean, that's one way to look at it, is just zoom in and see whether you're getting any data. But is there any, like, the data detector health that it's showing here? Yeah, what is the meaning of this? And can you tell us about the intent of this?
Yeah, I mean, this one here is intending to show the detector health on October 26th, and it's showing mainline detection and the percent of detection time working. Some of these seem a little bit out of place though, because I don't see why like the entire stretch of 169 is showing relatively poor health. Some areas are not a surprise because they're like in a construction zone. So like this area here on 94, this area is all completely ripped up. So it makes sense that these are all showing red because those are all under construction and haven't been put back into place yet. Some of these other ones, I feel like I got to ask Terrace a little bit about because something's not quite making sense of why we would see that much detector failures on some of these other corridors that have no construction or issues. So I guess I don't have a good answer for you because we use some other tools for looking at detector health and not necessarily IPEMS. So that's why a lot of times I haven't dug into these that deeply. So this is even kind of a little bit of surprise to me as to why this one's reporting the way it is. And some of it might be, recognizing maybe some hiccups in the data that maybe overall the data is good, but it's
Some of those hiccups are caused by weather sometimes, or just incomplete data, stuff like that.
Yeah, exactly. We have noticed that some of the Wavetronics have had issues with heavy rainfall. So that could be why. And I know that 169 corridor was kind of one of the earlier corridors with Wavetronics on it. So it's possible that that could be causing that. Because if I click on just one of these, I want to kind of look. Go into like the aggregate here. Yeah, here, and like I was showing you before, this is pulling 2 detector stations or 2 detectors within that station, and it's giving me 57% observed. So there is definitely something going on there with that detector over the last week here, or at least with the data feeding into IPEMS. So if I go into the view table, I can see that a lot of 50% observed. There's some 100% observed. So it's probably one out of the 2 stations is probably
if you select the interval to be seconds, you'll see missing values, I think. I think that would be in the raw data chart.
Oh, okay. Okay. Yeah. Yeah. This chart only gives me down to 5 minutes, but yeah, I think you're probably right.
Some of these issues, remember, some of these issues started when individual raw measurements from Wavetronics were implemented.
Yep.
The way that they're binned conflicts with PEM's ability to health check Wavetronics.
Yeah, you're right. We did some changes back in, was it roughly May, that we were looking at trying to capture the data for vehicle classification. What our Wavetronic sensors will do is they'll kind of dump them into various bins based on vehicle length. And our freight office was really interested, and our traffic data analysis office was interested in getting access to that data. And so we made an enhancement there, which kind of changed how the data is streamed out to IPEMS as well as some of the other tools. And so that is probably causing some of those problems. Because I bet if I go back here to like January, that was well before that that time period. Whoops, I should have changed my 2.
So yeah, this is an iPhone. Is this the intent to replace the data extract and data plot tools before kind of a few years? You guys developed a few years ago.
I'd say no. I think there's still a purpose for data plot and data extract. I still kind of use them all like interchangeably. Yeah. It kind of depends on what I'm using them for. I'd say IPEMS I use mostly when I'm trying to look at like large data sets over a longer period of time, or maybe over a corridor, and looking for like more general trends. And then if I want to maybe dig a little deeper, that's when I get into like data plot and data extract.
Okay. Yeah, because I noticed that detector report is still kind of old. It's a 2015 year, so
yeah, that's because we lost the position of the GIS person that used to update that report. So that is something that we're looking at, trying to update that, especially with some of the, a lot of it was just, you wouldn't have like the newer corridors like a Highway 52 down to Rochester, but at least the rest of it was still consistent. But now that you've got corridors like 35W North where lanes have been added, capacity has been added, and some detector stations have moved locations, we got to get that on the priority list to get that changed.
So you guys still keep that the updates for those that detector extract and the data plot tools there, that website?
Yeah, I think we'll probably
just to interject here, the basic way that the data is saved in the RTMC at the .traffic files hasn't changed. And that's what data plot and data extract is using. So the data are accessible. What I have been using PEMS because we don't have the all detector reports, I can go find the ID of the detector in PEMS then I can use data plot and data extract to get it.
So detectors here are more recent, so you get all the
detectors here are perfect for today. They're not good going back in history, but what is out there today, PEMS knows it perfectly, more or less. Okay,
it's more recent. Okay.
So you can still, in great extent, you can still use PEMS in lieu of the old detector report. But if you really want to use your old tools that were used in the .tracking files, the IDs of the detectors are the same.
Yeah, I will say that the data is maybe not perfect totally to today, but is much more recent. They do have to run a refresh every now and then for new detectors added onto the system. So even though they're starting to come in through the configuration file out of Iris, they have to do a little bit of a refresh in IPEMS to be able to accept some of those new locations. And that's mainly when we're like adding a new corridor. That new corridor won't come up until Iteris ingest that data.
Well, they haven't done a refresh lately because in variable based science, they still have the lane, the ILS, which is now for almost years.
Yeah, they don't necessarily refresh that page as much as they do with the detector file, but yeah, like some of these, like when Highway 52 came online, they had to basically run a refresh on that. So.
Hey, Brian.
Mm-hmm.
Hey, you know, this is a very nice tool, but you've got like a clear guide, and also, you know, you're looking at the one node, and then you've got Iris. Are you going to use, you know, different platforms for different ways, or are you going to, in the future, you're going to integrate them into kind of one platform to monitor all the performance measures as needed? Or you're going to keep them as more like a discrete?
They're probably going to still stay discrete. I mean, especially here with like Iteris IPEMS and then Iteris ClearGuide, they don't have any intent of like merging those two tools together. In fact, they're doing probably less and less kind of upgrades to IPEMS because they've gotten more interest from other DOTs in ClearGuide. It's a bigger seller for them. So that's kind of where they're putting all their investments. So we probably won't see a whole lot of changes to IPEMS. In terms of just the user interface and stuff like that. I mean, we'll continue to kind of maintain it and monitor it and add more detection as our detection comes online, because I think it's still a valuable tool in being able to look at, you know, kind of the various data sets. But yeah, you won't be able to get like the probe data and the detector data all in one spot. It'll still be kind of two tools. And then like I was saying earlier too, I think there's still kind of a need for data plot and data extract that we use. But this is kind of a nice tool in that, you know, you don't necessarily need to know the exact detector locations. You can kind of click on it on a map and don't need to know the detector IDs and such like that. So might be kind of the quicker kind of analysis is probably with IPEMS, but if you're digging in deeper, then you'd want probably some of those other tools.
Sure, but are there some overlaps, like, you know, travel time comparison, delay comparison? Seems like you have some performance measures, you know, in ClearGuide as well.
Yeah, exactly. You know, I think ClearGuide is certainly excels in more of the travel time aspect of it. This program doesn't really give you like a true travel time, except for maybe on some of those discrete corridors that we have in this corridor listing gives some travel times. But those are only for the ones that were set up, whereas ClearGuide gives you a lot more flexibility. And no, it's not even coming up with ones for travel time. So that's where ClearGuide gives you a lot more flexibility to kind of set up your routes, whereas these all have to be like pre-programmed in. And you know, I can get delay calculations here because then that's going to multiply times the number of vehicles that are out there experiencing that travel time. Whereas ClearGuide doesn't have that capability, because ClearGuide, it knows there was 20 minutes of delay, say, but it doesn't know like how many cars experience that, because it doesn't have a volume indication built into ClearGuide. So, so yeah, that's kind of why you end up maybe going back and forth between the two various tools.
Is this an annual contract with Iteris or?
Yep, it is.
Okay. And you've had it from the 90s or?
No, it was around probably 10 years ago, probably the 2011, 2012, somewhere in there. But yeah, it was developed for Caltrans starting in the 90s. Our data set goes back to the 90s because of the fact that we basically just took all the data that we had in our files and provided them to Iteris when we first launched the program. And then from there, they just keep kind of building on it based on that live data stream that's coming out of Iris and then populates into their database. So that's why it goes back that far, is just because we did a huge data dump when we first purchased the product. I don't know if there's some other areas I could dig into, but it's been a long time since I've gone through some of those. I kind of use it more for those general volume numbers and such like that. So I don't know if Joe, if maybe you want to show some of the stuff you've done on Highway 77, and then maybe that'll spark some new questions, and I can kind of go back to some of the live shots too, if we want to dig deeper into those.
Jump back and forth and give you a break for a second to get a drink of water.
Exactly.
I'll steal the screen. So as Brian was saying, we've used IPEMS a couple of different times on our Trunk Highway 77 freeway project between Apple Valley and I-494. Kind of one of the big overwhelming questions we've had on this study is, what are the impacts of COVID on this corridor? Are more people working from home? Is that trend going to continue? And really looking at, how are the volumes going to respond specifically in the peak hours for the corridor? And so this was the kind of overall metro area recovery from COVID. This is from the Met Council website. They have an interactive tool where you can look at specific corridors and kind of that interactive graphic per day, kind of showing what those volumes are compared to kind of what would be expected based on the seasonality of the corridor. While Brian was talking today, I pulled a VMT of the Trunk Highway 77 corridor for northbound, just to kind of see what that impact was. During COVID, we were seeing about a 60% decrease in traffic volume. And so I think the VMT kind of matches that trend where we were seeing that big dip in the summer. And as we kind of recovered in the fall, we were still quite low on the 77 corridor. But this is actually showing that VMT is kind of similar to what it was in the past. And so maybe some of that traffic has been returning to the corridor. But as we've been like kind of analyzing the peak hours, we've been specifically low for some of those peaks. But using IPEMS, we did download the flow data per hour in granularity for 2018 all the way through the start of October of 2021 to really look at what those peak hour volumes were for each direction. And so this is kind of how we set it up. We set it up as a time series, just downloading the flow. If we got to the granularity of an hour and exporting it to Excel, you can kind of create a graphic like this, where all we're looking at is the hourly volume at northbound 77 at the Minnesota River Bridge. And so what we're seeing is kind of the capacity of that corridor is around 2,000 vehicles per lane. So about that 6,000 metric, where we get a couple of peaks just above that, kind of pushing the capacity of the corridor. And we see that on a pretty recurring basis between 2018 and 2020 when we're kind of getting that max flow over that river bridge during the AM peak for northbound. And so when we started looking at that kind of max hourly volume and how that's responded compared to COVID, we're really seeing that, we got a little bit of a jump up here to kind of what the either average or kind of lower average of those weekday peaks were, but we're not really hitting any of those peaks where we're really pushing the capacity of the corridor. We're still about 13% low compared to a lot of that average daily. And then we're about 23% low compared to that max capacity of the corridor. And so we pulled that again for southbound, and we're seeing kind of a similar trend, even though VMTs for southbound are basically at what they were. All of those hours are a lot less than that capacity of the corridor. So we're seeing a lot less congestion on the 77 corridor because of that peak spreading, and really not all coming through during those peak hours. We also used IPEMS to identify bottlenecks on 77. So Mike Kanzioka with Alliant did a lot of this as well on this project. But really kind of looking at the bottlenecks that Alliant had found, we could actually go through and kind of match up those specific bottleneck locations from IPEMS, look at the number of days from 2019 that those bottlenecks were occurring, and really match up where those main bottleneck locations were happening, to really identify some of those congestion spots in our existing conditions report. We also used a lot of the trends from IPEM. So I'll kind of do kind of the live demonstration here, going back to how we kind of calibrated our VSIM models. And we used kind of the ranges of the max and min for a specific period, kind of had the average value from some of those. Oh, it logged me out of IPEMS here. There we go. So for the 77 corridor, we'd go to a specific station that we had in our VSIM modeling. And then we were able to get kind of the granularity for the speed out of IPEMS. And I believe we used ClearGuide for that as well for the final figures. But it's something you can kind of pull from either of these programs as you're starting to look at kind of calibration of the VSIM model. So you have both the volume from IPEMS and then the speed from ClearGuide. And then the last piece of information we were looking at was reliability on 77 and how that fits in with some of the VSIM results, and really showing how some of our spot improvements were tackling some of those reliability issues. So when we started looking at that reliability, what was the cause? Was it caused by an instant? Was it caused by weather? Was it caused by volumes getting up to the capacity of the corridor and kind of breaking down operations going through that spot? And so we ended up setting up an IPEMS download to download vehicle miles traveled as kind of our x-axis, and then delay under either 50 miles per hour or 45 miles per hour for our y-axis. And we kind of pulled hourly data, and so we ended up with a lot of data points for high vehicle miles traveled, ended up being more delay, but then we also got a bunch of points where we had low vehicle miles of travel and high hours of delay. And so we ended up kind of getting this U-shape type graphic where we kind of showed the capacity of the corridor, where a lot of the congestion caused by volumes is happening as we're getting in those high volumes, and we're starting to see some of those values come up as you start to get more delay. Your VMT breaks down and you start kind of coming back on this diagonal backwards. But for a lot of our highest delay days or our hours that we were looking at on the corridor, they were happening because of snow during the winter. So that was really where we were seeing a lot of the highest volume days. But then there were quite a few crash days mixed in where a crash was causing a significant amount of unreliability on the corridor as well. When we started looking at southbound 77, we ended up seeing a lot more of these congestion related reliability issues, and kind of looking closer at the volumes, we end up getting a little bit more traffic demand, specifically coming in from 494 going southbound on 77 in that PM peak, which was really causing a lot more of this delay to happen due to just congestion. We still have some of those snow or fog or crash type congestions caused in this figure, but just kind of looking at the difference between northbound and southbound, we can really see that congestion and just that total demand of volume was a bigger factor than it was for northbound. So that's how we kind of used IPIMS to tackle three kind of the big questions for 77, and hope you can kind of replicate it for other freeway projects throughout the metro as well. That's all I had to share, something quick, and happy to answer any questions.
I can go next. I have a even shorter presentation. It'll be pretty quick. So let me share my screen here. And like Brian mentioned, it'll be the main thing we use ITERIS for is the big picture understanding of the traffic. So the example I was looking at is, are you able to see my screen with the Google map?
Yeah, we can see it too here.
Okay, so we're doing a corridor study here, Clearwater, of the Highway 24 corridor. And even before we go in and get any data, we wanted to get an understanding of what are the traffic conditions out here. And I went into PEMS to get information on 94 here, because that's the major corridor which feeds 24. So when we go in and extract the monthly data patterns, so I tried to get data for 2018 and 2019 pre-pandemic at 3 locations. So I wanted to do something west of 24, something at 24 on 94, and then something east. So when I went in and tried to get data west of 24, I saw that there wasn't much, because probably the detector was down in 2018 and 2019. But at 24, I was able to see the patterns, the monthly patterns. So 2018 and 2019, typically the peak month looks like it's August if we plot the flow by month. Something happened in 2019, probably with the detectors, in September or so over there. So, but this gives me a general idea of what are the flow patterns there. Similarly, westbound on 94, that was eastbound. We had similar patterns peaking in August. And then east of there, we didn't have data for much of 2018 and 2019. Much of the beginning of the year, there wasn't much data, but it started maybe the detectors came back on towards the end of 2019, and we started seeing some data. So this gives us a general big picture of what are the peak months out there. And then we try to zoom in on those summer months a little bit more and see what's the daily variation there. So you'll see the peak near July 4th, probably a little bit of jump near Labor Day, not so much, but July 4th seems like the biggest jump there. Yeah, so just getting the data quickly from this tool, it helps determine when you have to go actually get the counts. And the other interesting pattern we are able to get once we dig down to the hourly variation is, the daily variation by hour is that we were able to see that Sunday actually is the peak day over there because of the recreational pattern for eastbound I-94, and westbound is peaking on Friday evenings when everybody's going from the metro to their cabins and to greater Minnesota. So it's great that we have PEMs available to go extract this information and help us understand traffic patterns, even in areas outside the metro area, and then also understand the seasonal and daily variation so quickly so that we can do more more concentrated and interesting traffic studies in these areas. So that's all I had for my presentation. Any closing thoughts, Brian?
No, nothing from me. Unless there's some other questions or comments from anybody else.
I don't see any questions. I see one new person here we have not seen before, so I want her to introduce herself. Mara, can you introduce yourself? I think this is probably the first time you're attending, so if you can hear us. All right, so maybe she's away from the keyboard or whatever, but thanks, Brian, for the excellent presentation. That was very informative. I thought I knew PEMS, but then now I know I don't know it fully, but it's great that we were able to record this, and I'll make the recording available for others to be able to use it. For our next presentation, we'll probably have John when he's ready, John Hordos, on what topic were you going to talk about, John? Can you mention?
Well, I don't know. That was one of the issues that I hadn't had time to think about it.
Okay.
What would you like? I mean, since we're all here, any requests? It has to be freeway related, pedestrian related.
It probably simulation. I mean, the committee is simulation and capacity analysis. So something relevant to that. Capacity analysis and simulation, anything you can present on that would be helpful. And then probably in our next meeting, we'll select our next committee chair and co-chair. Actually, the chair is already decided. That'll be Mike next year, and we'll try to pick a new co-chair for him for next year in the next meeting. So thanks all for attending, and Brian for the excellent presentation, and we'll see you all next time.
Yep, thanks for